Tonight, we are going to take a long, quiet journey together. A gentle journey through one life. A life that began far away, near the sea, in a small place where the wind moved slowly through the hills and the evenings were long and soft. There is no hurry to this story. It moves slowly, the way evenings move, the way the light fades at the end of a long, ordinary day. You can let it drift over you without following it closely. Just rest here and let it come. There is a country at the edge of Europe where the land meets the Adriatic Sea. The sea there is very calm in the mornings, very blue, very still. Along the coast, there are small towns and old stone walls and little harbours where boats rock gently in the water. Inland, the land rises slowly. There are hills and old forests and quiet roads that wind between them. In summer, the sky over this country is pale and wide. The evenings last a long time. The light turns gold, and then soft orange, and then finally a quiet, dusty blue before dark. In winter, the air is cool and clear. The sea looks darker. The hills are quiet. This country is called Croatia. And somewhere in this country, in a small village in the hills, not far from the sea, a boy was born. His name was Luka. The village where Luka was born was called Modrici. It was a small place, a quiet place. There were houses made of stone. There were fields and paths and trees that moved slowly in the wind. There were not many people. There was not much noise. The sky above the village was wide and open. In the mornings, the air smelled of earth and grass, and sometimes the distant salt of the sea. In the evenings, things got very still. Luka was born in the year 1985. It was the 9th of September. Summer was ending. The light was already beginning to change, growing a little softer, a little lower in the sky. His family was simple and good. His grandfather was a farmer. His grandmother kept the house. There were goats on the hillside. There was a fire in the evenings. There was the smell of bread and the sound of quiet voices. Life moved slowly in the village. It moved at the pace of the seasons. Luka's grandfather was a man named Luka as well. The boy was named after him. The older Luka was a steady man, a man who worked with his hands, who knew the land and the seasons, who moved through his days with patience. He had a kind face. He worked in the fields in the morning. He rested in the afternoon. He sat outside in the evenings when the air was warm. The boy, little Luka, would follow him sometimes, walking behind him on the paths between the fields, watching what he did, listening to the sounds of the village, the chickens in the yard, the wind in the trees, the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere down the road. These were the sounds of those early years. Small sounds, unhurried sounds. And the boy grew slowly in the middle of them. Luka had a mother and a father. His mother was called Radoika. His father was Stipe. They were a close family, a warm family. His father worked. His mother kept the home. There were brothers and a sister. There were meals together and evenings spent close to one another. In those early years, the village was the whole world for little Luka. The paths between the houses, the fields at the edge of the village, the hill behind the last houses, where you could see a long way on a clear day, the sky over the hills in the morning, the smell of earth after rain, the sound of the wind moving through the trees at the edge of the fields. These things were ordinary, and they were enough. And somewhere in those early years, a football appeared. It is hard to say exactly when. It happens slowly with children, quietly, without any announcement. One day there is a ball, and the child kicks it, and the ball rolls across the ground. And that is all it takes. A ball appeared in Luka's life, the way things appear in childhood, naturally, without explanation, and he began to kick it against walls, along paths, in the small spaces between houses. He was not large for his age. He was small, light. He moved with ease. The ball came naturally to his feet. He did not think about this. He was too young to think about it. He simply played. The mornings were for playing. The afternoons were for playing. The evenings, when the light was long and golden over the hills, were for playing. The ball rolled. He followed it. That was all. The early 1990s were a difficult time in Croatia. There was a period of great change, of uncertainty, of movement. And during this time, Luka's family, like many families, had to leave their home. They left the village. They left the stone houses and the goats on the hillside and the wide sky over the fields. They moved to a new place. They moved to the coast. The town was called Zadar. It was an old town, a very old town. It sat right on the edge of the sea. There were old stone walls around the old part of the city. There were narrow streets between the buildings. There were small squares where people sat in the evenings. And everywhere, the sea. The sea was there when you woke in the morning. It was there when you walked through the streets. It was there in the evenings when the light turned orange over the water and the boats rocked gently in the harbour. The smell of the sea was everywhere in Zadar. Salt and water, and something clean and distant. For Luka, arriving in this new place as a young boy, coming from the inland hills, from the quiet village, from a world of earth and grass and stone, the sea must have been something new and large. All that water, all that open, moving, endless blue. Zadar had a hotel near the sea. It was called the Kolovare Hotel. Luka's family lived here for a time, in rooms in the hotel. It was a modest way to live. Simple, but it was shelter. Outside the hotel, there was a small car park. And in this car park, on the hard, flat ground, Luka played football. He played with the other children who lived nearby. He played in the afternoons when school was finished. He played until the light went and the evening came, and it was too dark to see the ball clearly. The ground was hard. There was no grass. There were no goalposts. But there was the ball, and there was the space. And there was Luka, small and light, moving with the ball across the concrete. He played here for years. The hard ground made him careful. The ball did not bounce kindly on concrete the way it does on grass. It moved fast, and sometimes unpredictably. To control it well on that surface, You had to be very attentive, very soft with your touch. And slowly, without noticing it was happening, Luka developed a soft touch. The evenings in Zeta were gentle. When the day's heat had passed, the air cooled slowly. People came out into the streets. They walked along the waterfront. They sat at small tables outside the cafes. They talked in low voices while children ran around them. The sea was there beside them, dark and quiet. The sky above the old city was full of stars on clear nights. The narrow streets smelled of old stone and salt air, and sometimes the smell of food coming from the open windows of houses. These were the ordinary evenings of that city, one after another, through the seasons. And Luka grew up inside them. At school, Luka was a quiet student, not loud, not difficult. He did what was asked of him. He listened. He was thoughtful. But football was always in the background. After school, the ball was waiting. After dinner, when there was still a little light, the ball was there. It was always there. And he was always going back to it. Somewhere around this time, there was a football club in Zadar. The club was called NK Zada. It was a local club, not a famous club, not a large club, but it was a real club, with a pitch and coaches and proper training sessions. And at some point, when Luka was still young, he began to train with this club. He went to training sessions in the afternoons. He ran drills on the grass. He learned the shapes of the game, how to stand, how to move, how to receive a pass, and what to do next. He was still small, still very light. Some of the other boys were bigger, stronger. But Luka was quick, and his touch was good. And he could see the game clearly, even at that young age. Not through any great drama, not through any sudden moment, just quietly, gradually. He began to understand the game, the way the spaces opened and closed, the way the ball could travel from one player to another, the way a simple pass, made at exactly the right moment, could move the whole shape of things. He learned these things slowly, the way a child learns most things, through repetition, through time, through just being there and paying attention. The coach at NK Zadar noticed something in Luka. He noticed the touch, the calmness, the way the boy moved without rushing. There are players who rush through the game, who are always in a hurry, who want everything to happen quickly. Luka was not like that. Even as a child, he seemed to have time. More time than the other players. Time to see. Time to think. Time to make the right decision. He did not know he had this yet. He was too young to notice such things about himself. He just played. But the coach saw it. The years in Zadar were, for the most part, calm years. There were the rhythms of school and training, and evenings by the sea. There were the seasons changing over the old city. Winter, with its cool, clear air, and the sea looking dark and distant. Spring with the light returning. The days growing longer. The smell of something warm in the air. Summer with the tourists arriving. The waterfront busy. The sea brilliant blue in the midday heat. and autumn again. The light going golden, the days shortening, the quiet returning. Luka grew through these seasons. He grew, and the football grew with him. The ball was always there, always the most reliable thing in his days. He could always return to it, round and familiar, comfortable underfoot. His mother watched him play sometimes. She would stand at the edge of the pitch or the car park and watch her son moving with the ball. She was not a person who knew much about football. She did not think about tactics or technique. She just watched her son. And she saw that he was happy when he played, that something in him was easy when the ball was at his feet. She let him play. She gave him the time and the space to be out there with the ball. His father watched too sometimes. Stipe was a quiet man. He did not make a great fuss about the football. He would come to watch, and then they would walk home together. Maybe they talked about the training session. Maybe they walked in silence, with the sea somewhere nearby, and the evening air around them. The streets quiet, the light fading, the sound of their footsteps on the old stone. When Luka was around 15 or 16, someone from a larger club came to watch the young players in Zadar. This was a person from Dinamo Zagreb. Dinamo Zagreb was the biggest football club in Croatia. It was based in the capital city. It was a professional club with a long history and a big stadium. A very different world from NK Zadar. The person from Dinamo came and watched the training session, and he saw Luka. He watched the small, quiet boy moving through the session, making his simple, accurate passes, moving without hurry, seeing the game clearly. He watched for a while, and then the session ended, and the people went home, and the evening came in over the city, over the old walls and the sea, the way it always did. The move to Zagreb did not happen immediately. These things take time. There are conversations and arrangements and practical matters. But eventually, the conversations happened. And eventually, it was decided. Luka would go to Zagreb. He would join the youth academy at Dinamo Zagreb. He would leave Zadar. He would leave the old stone walls and the narrow streets and the sea. To be a teenager and to leave the place where you have grown up. To leave the familiar streets and the smell of the sea at night. To go somewhere new and unknown. That is a particular feeling. Zagreb was a very different city from Zadar. It was inland, no sea, much larger. The streets were wider. The buildings were taller. There were trams and busy squares and a very different kind of noise. Luka went. He packed what he needed. He left his family. He went to the new city, and he began again. The academy at Dinamo Zagreb was a serious place. Training was structured and regular. There were proper coaches, proper facilities, real pitches with real grass. The other boys in the academy were good players. Some of them were very good. There was competition here. And Luka was still small, still light. There were people who wondered whether he was strong enough for professional football, whether his body would hold up. These doubts were not unusual. They came, and they were there for a while. And Luka continued to train, to play, to pay attention. He let the ball do what it did. And the days went on. The years at the Dinamo Zagreb Academy passed steadily. There were training sessions and small matches and periods of rest. There were seasons. There was weather. There were the ordinary things of daily life. Luka made friends at the academy, other young players who were also far from their homes, also learning, also growing. They ate together and trained together and spent their evenings together. There was a quiet community in it. Young men who all wanted the same simple thing: to play. In Zagreb, Luka learned the city slowly. He walked the streets. He found which cafes were quiet and which were busy. He discovered the parks and the old market and the cathedral that rose above the upper town. Zagreb was not like Zadar. It did not have the sea, but it had its own quality. The trams moving through the streets on winter mornings, their windows fogged with cold, the chestnut sellers in autumn, the long, straight avenues lined with old buildings. And slowly, without deciding it, the city became familiar. The streets that had once felt strange began to feel ordinary. The walks that had once felt uncertain began to feel like habit. By the time Luka was 17 or 18, something was becoming clear to those who watched him closely. Not to everyone, not yet, but to the coaches who saw him every day. The touch and the passing and the movement and the seeing, all of it together. The shape of a player was becoming visible. Not a finished player. Not yet. Just the beginning of one. The evenings in Zagreb in those years were gentle. In the summer, the city had a soft, warm quality in the evenings. People sat outside. There was music somewhere, faint and distant. The sky went pink, and then purple, and then dark. The stars appeared slowly, and Luka might have been sitting somewhere in the city, on a bench, on the steps outside the apartment, just resting, feeling the tiredness in his legs from training. The city settling quietly around him. The trams running. The distant sound of voices. The night coming slowly in over the rooftops. The sea was far away now, but it was still there, somewhere in the background, still moving in the dark on the other side of the country, still making its slow, steady sound against the old stone walls of Zadar, the way it always had, the way it always would. The city of Zagreb at night is very still. The trams stop running after a certain hour. The streets empty slowly. The lights in the windows go out one by one. And in the quiet that is left, the city just rests. The old buildings along the wide avenues. The cathedral up on the hill with its 2 tall spires. The parks where the trees stand in the dark without moving. All of it resting. All of it still. Somewhere in this city, in those early years, Luka was resting too. In a small room. In a quiet building. The day finished. The training finished. The evening finished. Just the dark now, and the stillness and the slow passage of the night. We will follow him gently from here. No rush, just the slow movement of days, one into the next, the way days always move, whether we pay attention or not. At Dinamo Zagreb, the work continued. Morning after morning, session after session. The same drills repeated, the same movements practiced until they became effortless. This is what training is, at its most basic. Doing the same things over and over until they stop requiring thought. Until the body knows what to do before the mind has finished deciding. Luka was patient with this process. He did not seem to tire of repetition. He would do a drill 10 times, and then 10 more times, and then 10 more. Each time, a little cleaner, a little quieter, a little more certain. The coaches noticed this. Not his speed, not his strength, his patience, his willingness to stay with something until it was right. The seasons moved through Zagreb, the way they move through all old cities, slowly and without ceremony. Winter arrived and the air turned cold, and the parks went bare, and the trams moved through the grey mornings with their windows fogged. And then spring came. The way spring always comes. Gradually, and then all at once. The trees along the avenues put out their first small leaves. The light returned. The evenings grew longer. People came back out into the streets after the winter. The cafes put their tables outside again. The city opened up. And the football continued through all of it. Through the cold and the warmth. Through the wet grass and the dry. Through the short days and the long ones. Always the ball. Always the pitch. Always the work. There was a quality that was becoming more noticeable in Luka during these years. It was the way he moved in relation to other players. In football, there are players who try to hold on to the ball as long as possible, and there are players who let it go quickly, who understand that the ball moves faster than any person can run, who trust their teammates to be where they should be. Luka was becoming the second kind of player. He received the ball and he released it. One touch, sometimes two. Clean and simple. No hesitation. The ball arrived and then it left again, moving in exactly the direction it needed to go. This sounds easy when you describe it. It is not easy. To do this well, you have to see things before they happen. You have to know where the space will be a moment from now, where your teammate will be, what the best direction is before the ball even arrives. Luka was learning to do this. Slowly, steadily, one training session at a time. Outside the training ground, the city continued its ordinary life. The market near the old town opened early in the mornings. There were stalls with vegetables and flowers and bread. Old women moved between the stalls with their shopping bags. The smell of fresh bread and damp stone in the early morning air. And then later, as the day warmed, the market filled up, and the voices got louder, and the whole square hummed with the ordinary business of the city. Luka would have passed through this world on his way to training, walking through the streets of the city on an ordinary morning. The city going about its day around him. Nothing remarkable. Just the city and the morning and the walk to the training ground. He was growing during these years. Not much taller. He was never going to be a tall player, but he was growing in other ways. His body was becoming stronger, slowly, more capable of the demands of professional football. His understanding of the game was deepening, and his confidence, quiet as it always was settling into something more solid. Not loud confidence, not the kind that announces itself, just a quiet, internal steadiness, a sense of knowing what he was doing, of belonging on the pitch. The doubts that had surrounded him in those early months at the academy had not disappeared entirely. There were still people who looked at the slight frame and wondered. But Luka had been here long enough now that the wondering had grown quieter. The work was speaking for itself. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just steadily. The way water finds its level. Over time, through repetition and patience, the work had accumulated, and the accumulation was visible now to those who paid attention. There is a particular kind of footballer who does not look impressive when you first see him, who does not stand out for his size or his speed or anything dramatic, but who, when you watch more carefully, when you follow him through a whole match and not just the obvious moments, reveals something, a kind of intelligence, a kind of ease, a way of being in the right place, of making the right decision, of making things look simpler than they are. Luka was becoming this kind of player. The evenings in Zagreb in summer were warm and long. The sun set late, and the sky held its colour for a long time after. A deep blue that went on and on before finally giving way to dark. People stayed outside late on those evenings. There was the sound of the city in summer, the low hum of it, the voices and the distant music and the occasional sound of a tram still moving somewhere, and the sky above it all, wide and darkening, the first stars appearing. 1, then 2, then slowly more. Luka was 19 when he first appeared for Dinamo Zagreb's first team. It was not a sudden arrival. It came gradually, the way most things come in football. A place on the bench, a few minutes near the end of a match, then a little more time. Then, eventually, a start. These steps happened slowly. And with each one, something settled a little more. The first team was a different world from the academy. The players were older. The pace was faster. The demands were greater. There was less patience for error. But there was also something in it that was simply good. The feeling of belonging to a proper team, of training every day alongside men who had been playing professionally for years, of being part of something that mattered to people. Dinamo Zagreb had supporters who came to the stadium and cared deeply about the results. The stadium on a match day was a different thing from the quiet training sessions of the academy. There was noise and colour, and the feeling of many people gathered together for the same reason. Luka was stepping into this world, carefully, quietly, but he was stepping into it. The city moved around him as it always did. The trams on their routes, the market in the mornings, the parks where people walked their dogs in the evenings. the ordinary life of the city continuing alongside this other life, the life of the football club, the life of the pitch, and both of them, somehow, part of the same days. Somewhere during this period, Luka was sent on loan. This is a common thing in football. A young player goes to a smaller club for a season, to play regularly, to gain experience, to grow in ways that are difficult when you are only getting a few minutes here and there. Luka went to a club called Zrinski Mostar. It was in Bosnia and Herzegovina, not far, geographically, but a different country, a different city. Mostar was an old city, known for its old bridge over the river Neretva. A beautiful bridge, old stone arching over clear water. The city sat in a valley between hills. The hills were dry and rocky in summer. The river ran cold through the middle of the city. It was a different kind of place from Zagreb. Smaller, quieter in some ways, warmer. And Luka played there for a season. He played regularly, week after week, match after match. This was what he needed. Not the occasional appearance, not the few minutes at the end. Real playing time, real matches, real decisions to make, again and again, through a whole season. A season of regular football does something to a young player. It builds a kind of fluency, the same way that speaking a language every day builds fluency, the same way that any practice, done consistently and often, produces a kind of ease. By the end of a full season, the game feels different. Not easier, exactly, but more familiar, more natural. The situations that once seemed complicated begin to feel manageable. The decisions that once required thought begin to arrive more quickly. Luka was building this fluency in Mostar, one match at a time. The evenings in Mostar were warm. The river caught the light in the evenings. The old stone of the bridge reflected it. The cafes along the riverbank were busy in the warm months. The sound of conversation and the sound of the water running over the stones below. A gentle, steady sound. The kind of sound that stays in the background of an evening without demanding attention. Back in Zagreb, between these loans, the city was always there, waiting. The wide avenues, the trams, the cathedral above the upper town, the market in the mornings with its smell of bread and flowers, the parks going through their seasons, the city unchanged by his absence, and yet somehow comfortable and familiar when he returned. There is something reassuring about a city that continues without you, that goes on with its ordinary business while you are elsewhere, and then when you return, it is still there. The same streets, the same sounds, the same evening light on the old buildings. By the time Luka returned properly to Dinamo Zagreb, he was a different player from the one who had left. Not different in any dramatic way, not transformed, just more settled, more certain. The loan seasons had given him something that could not be taught in training sessions. They had given him time. Time in real matches, in real situations, against real opponents. And now, he brought all of that back to Dinamo. The Dinamo Zagreb first team was a good team in those years. They competed at the top of Croatian football, and occasionally in European competitions. There were experienced players in the squad, players who had been at the club for many years. Luka fitted in among them, not loudly, not by making himself the center of attention, just by doing his job, by being where he needed to be, by making the simple passes and moving and being available and keeping the ball moving. The way water moves through a landscape, finding the easiest path. He played in the central areas of the pitch. This is where the game is organized, where the ball comes in from the defense and is directed forward, where the tempo is set, where decisions are made that shape everything else. It is not always a visible position. The players who do it well are sometimes not noticed because what they do looks simple. They take the ball and they pass it. They move and they receive it again. They keep things flowing. But when they are absent, things stop flowing, and then their importance becomes clear. Luka was beginning to perform this role for Dinamo. Quietly and consistently. The Croatian league had its rhythms. Matches on weekends, training through the week, the grounds in different cities around the country, the travel on the team bus, the different stadiums and their different atmospheres, small grounds in small cities where the crowd was close to the pitch, larger grounds in the bigger cities where the noise came from all sides. Through all of it, the same work, the same ball, the same decisions, the same quiet attention to what was happening around him. In the evenings after matches, the city of Zagreb was usually quiet. Or perhaps it was Luka who was quiet, tired after the match, moving through the streets at the end of a long day. The city lights on the wet streets after autumn rain. The trams still running, their yellow light moving through the dark. The smell of the city at night. Old stone and the faint smell of rain. And something warm from the bakeries that opened early. The sea was a long way from Zagreb. But when the summer came, and there was a break from football, Luka could return to Zadar, could walk the old streets again, could smell the salt in the air, could stand at the edge of the water in the evenings and watch the sea moving slowly in the last light. The sea was always the same, whether he had been away for weeks or months. It moved the same way, made the same sounds, caught the same evening light on its surface, the boats still in the harbour, the old walls still standing around the old town, the sky above the water going through its slow colours as the sun went down. These returns to Zadar were quiet. Time with family, time with the familiar things of that city, walking in the evenings along the waterfront, the way people had always walked there. The sound of footsteps on old stone, the sound of low conversation, the sound of the sea. Back in Zagreb, when the season resumed, there was a growing sense of something building around Luka's career. Not loudly, not with any dramatic announcement, just a gradual accumulation of attention. Other clubs were watching him. This is how football works. Word travels slowly through the network of scouts and coaches and directors. Someone sees a player, mentions him to someone else. That person watches. And gradually, a quiet interest forms. Dinamo Zagreb were aware that other clubs were paying attention to their young midfielder. Luka continued to train, to play, to do his work. He was not the kind of person to talk about what might happen next, about which clubs might be interested, about what the future might hold. He was too focused on the present for that. the next session, the next match, the next decision. There was another loan during this period, this time to a club in the Croatian city of Split. The club was called Hajduk Split. This was a very different kind of loan from the previous ones. Hajduk Split was not a modest lower league club. It was one of the most famous clubs in Croatia, one of the oldest, one with deep roots in the city and a passionate support. Split was also a city by the sea, a city of old stone and narrow streets and the sea everywhere around it. The Adriatic was right there, at the edge of the city. And for Luka, coming from Zagreb and from his childhood in Zadar, being back beside the sea must have felt like something familiar returning. The smell of salt in the air again, the sound of the water, the quality of the light over the sea in the mornings and the evenings. Playing for Hajduk Split was a different experience from the previous loans. The club had a very devoted support. The stadium was called the Poljud. It was a large, curved concrete structure that sat close to the sea. On match days, the atmosphere was intense in the way that certain old clubs are intense. Not violent or threatening, just full of feeling. The supporters had a deep attachment to the club. It was part of the identity of the city. Playing in that stadium was a different thing from playing in a quiet ground at a small club. The noise came from all sides. The colour and movement of the crowd. And Luka moved through it the way he always moved through everything. Without being overwhelmed, without rushing, with his usual steadiness. The city of Split was beautiful in its own way. The old part of the city was built inside the walls of an ancient Roman palace. The walls were still standing. The streets inside were very old and very narrow. There were small squares and old churches and cafes built into ancient stone rooms. In the evenings, people gathered in these squares. They sat at tables. They talked. The sound of conversation echoed off the old stone walls. The sea was nearby. The smell of it drifted through the narrow streets. The light in those old squares in the evening was warm and soft. Luka played for Hajduk Split for a season. He played regularly. He played well. His understanding of the game continued to deepen through these months of regular football. The patterns were becoming more instinctive. The decisions faster and cleaner. He was becoming, very gradually, the player he was going to be. Not there yet, but moving toward it. One match at a time. One session at a time. One ordinary, unremarkable day at a time. The sea in Split was different from the sea in Zadar. Or perhaps it was the same sea, and only the angle of it was different, the way it looked from a different stretch of coast. But it had the same quality. That same stillness in the early mornings. That same blue in the middle of the day. That same deepening colour in the evenings when the light went low. The boats in the harbour. The old buildings reflected in the water. The sound of it against the stones of the old harbour walls. And when that season ended, Luka returned to Zagreb, to Dinamo, to the wide avenues and the trams and the cathedral above the upper town, back to the training ground where he had spent so many mornings over the past several years. The grass was the same. The goalposts were the same. The morning light came over the same trees at the same angle. And Luka began to train again. In the years that followed, he established himself properly at Dinamo Zagreb. He became a regular in the first team, an important player. The club won the Croatian league during these years, more than once. These were not dramatic victories, not epic journeys, just seasons of good, consistent football that ended with the title. The work of many players, over many months. And Luka was part of it. He also began to play for the Croatian national team. During this period, the national team was a different context again, playing alongside players from other clubs, players who had their own ways of doing things, their own habits and preferences, building the understanding that a team needs, learning each other. The first appearances for the national team are always careful ones, finding your place, understanding the shape of things, contributing what you can. Luka did this carefully, consistently. The Croatian national team had a proud history. They had reached the semi-finals of the World Cup in 1998. They had good players. They were taken seriously in European football. To play for the national team was to step into something with meaning and history behind it. Luka wore the red and white of Croatia. He wore it quietly and with care. The evenings before international matches were calm. The team gathered in their hotel. There were meals together and meetings, and then the quiet hours before sleep. In different cities across Europe, different hotel rooms with different views. Sometimes the lights of a foreign city, sometimes just the dark beyond the curtains, the sounds of an unfamiliar place outside. And Luka in the room, resting, letting the night pass. By his mid-20s, Luka was one of the best players in Croatian football. This had happened slowly and without drama. It had happened through the accumulation of all those sessions and matches and loan spells and ordinary days. Through the car park in Zida and the hard ground and the soft touch it had developed. Through the patience of the academy years. Through the long seasons in modest clubs. Through the gradual deepening of understanding. It had taken years. It had taken the kind of time and repetition that most things take. And now it was visible. Scouts from bigger clubs, from clubs in England and Spain and Germany, were watching Croatian football. And when they watched Croatian football, they saw Luka, the small, light midfielder who moved so calmly, who made the simple passes that kept things flowing, who seemed to have more time than the players around him. Their reports were cautious and careful. They used words like composed, intelligent, consistent. They noted the touch, the awareness, the positioning, and they kept watching. The evenings in Zagreb continued their ordinary course. The seasons turned. The trams ran. The market in the old town opened in the mornings and closed in the afternoons. The cathedral stood on its hill above the city. The parks went through their colours. Green in summer, gold and red in autumn, bare in winter, and then green again. And through all of it, the football continued. One season ending, another beginning, the same work, the same days, the same ball. There is a particular quality to the years before a large change. The years when everything is still ordinary, when the days are still the same kind of days they have always been, but when, somewhere in the background, something is shifting, slowly, without announcement. The way the light shifts in the afternoon without you noticing, until suddenly it is evening. These were those years for Luka. The ordinary days of a footballer in Zagreb. Training in the mornings. Matches at weekends. The city going about its life around him. And somewhere in the background, the next thing forming. Quietly, without any hurry. The sea was still there, far to the south and west, along the Dalmatian coast, past the old stone towns and the harbours, and the boats rocking in the dark. The sea was still making its slow, steady sound against the old walls of Zadar, still moving in and out, in and out. The way it had always moved, the way it would always move. Indifferent to the small things happening in the cities and the training grounds and the hotel rooms of football. Just the sea, moving in the dark. Steady and quiet and always there. And slowly, the world opened again. The city of London is very large. Larger than Zagreb. Larger than Split or Zadar or any of the cities Luka had known before. It spreads out in all directions, on both sides of a wide grey river, through borough after borough, neighbourhood after neighbourhood, on and on, until the buildings finally thin out into suburbs and then into fields. From above, on a clear day, you can see how vast it is. The rooftops, and the parks, and the winding river cutting through the middle of it all. From the street, you only ever see a small part of it at a time. A particular road, a particular neighbourhood, a particular view down a long avenue of old plane trees. London reveals itself slowly, and it takes a long time to feel familiar. Luka arrived in London in the summer of 2008. He had signed for Tottenham Hotspur. Tottenham was a club in the north of the city, a club with a long history and a devoted support, and a large stadium in a part of London called White Hart Lane. It was a proper, established English club, and Luka was joining it from a different world entirely. From Croatian football, from the rhythms and the scale of that league. And now, here was London, the noise and the size and the pace of it, the grey skies of an English summer, the rain. English football had a particular quality to it. The grounds were full. The supporters were loud and very close to the pitch. The game moved quickly. There was very little time on the ball. Everything happened faster than it did in Croatian football. The physical demands were higher. The press was more intense. And the weather was colder and wetter and greyer for more of the year. For a player arriving from the warmth of the Adriatic coast, from cities built of white stone beside a clear blue sea, this was a considerable change. Luka settled into London slowly. He found a place to live. He learned the routes to the training ground. He began to understand the rhythms of English football, the midweek matches, the busy Christmas period when games came very close together, the long season that stretched from August all the way through to May. It was a different kind of football calendar from what he had known. More matches, more travel, more demands on the body. And the training was intense. The sessions at Tottenham were rigorous and carefully organised. He arrived each morning and he worked. And then he drove back through the grey London streets in the late afternoon. And the city continued around him. London in autumn has a particular quality. The leaves on the plane trees go yellow and then brown. They fall onto the pavements and collect in the gutters and blow along the wide roads. The light changes. It gets lower and softer. The evenings come earlier. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the sky is already deepening. By 5, the street lights are on. The city in those long autumn evenings has a particular kind of atmosphere. The warmth of the lit windows, the people moving quickly through the streets in the cold, the smell of damp leaves and exhaust, and something warm from the food stalls at the edge of the market. Luka moved through this city as it went through its seasons. A new person in a very old city, finding his way. The football at Tottenham was not always straightforward in those early years. There were matches that went well. There were others that were more difficult. There were periods when things flowed and periods when they did not. This is the ordinary texture of any footballer's career. No season is entirely smooth. There are weeks when the game feels easy and weeks when it feels heavy. Weeks when the passes find their target and weeks when nothing seems to connect. Luka went through both kinds of weeks. He trained through the difficult ones the same way he trained through the easy ones, with the same attention, the same patience. His teammates at Tottenham were from many different countries. There were players from France and from the Netherlands and from Brazil and from England. A group of different people from different backgrounds, brought together by the same work. The dressing room has its own culture in every club, its own humour and its own habits and its own quiet understandings. Luka learned these things slowly at Tottenham. The way you learn them, by being present, by paying attention, by spending time in the same rooms and on the same pitches and travelling on the same buses and planes. Gradually, the unfamiliar becomes familiar. The training ground at Tottenham was in a part of North London. In the mornings, Luka would arrive, and the pitches would be damp with overnight rain or dew. The grass very green in the grey morning light. The other players arriving. The coaches setting out the cones and markers for the session. The smell of cut grass and cold air. And then the session would begin. The same rhythms as always. The warm-up, the drills, the small-sided games, the ball moving across the wet grass, the sound of boots and the sound of voices, and the dull sound of the ball being struck. These sounds were the same here as they had been in Zagreb, as they had been in Zadar and Mostar and Split. Different city, different country, different language around him, but the same sounds, the same grass, the same ball. London at night was never completely dark. The sky above it had a permanent orange glow from all the lights below. Even in the quietest streets, even very late, there was light coming from somewhere. This was different from the cities Luka had grown up in. In Zadar at night, you could see stars. In London, the stars were harder to find. The city's own light was too bright, but there were other things in London at night. The river, dark and wide, reflecting the lights of the bridges and the buildings along its banks. The parks, large and quiet in the dark. The sound of the city, reduced at night to a low, distant hum. Not silent, but quieter. In those years at Tottenham, Luka continued to develop. The pace of English football was shaping him, forcing him to make decisions faster, to move the ball more quickly, to find space more cleverly. The game was making new demands, and he was responding to them. Not always immediately, not always without difficulty, but over the months and the years, responding. There were good seasons at Tottenham, seasons when the club performed well, when they competed for the top positions in the league, when they played in European competition. Luka was a regular part of the team during these seasons. He played in the matches that mattered. He contributed to the results, not always in the most visible ways, often in the quiet ways. The accurate pass that started something, the movement that created space, the interception that stopped something before it began. The kind of contribution that does not always make the highlights, but that the coaches and the more attentive supporters noticed and valued. The years in London passed with the particular pace that cities have. Fast and slow at the same time. Fast because there was always something happening. Always another match, another week of training, another demand on the time and the body. Slow because the days themselves were long and full. Training in the mornings, rest in the afternoons, the quiet evenings, the seasons turning, the trees in the parks going through their changes, the river, always there in the middle of the city, moving slowly toward the sea. Luka continued to play for the Croatian national team during these years. International breaks came regularly through the season. He would leave London and travel to Croatia, or to wherever the match was being played. He would train with the national squad for a few days, and then play the match, and then return to London and the rhythms of club football. These international weeks had their own texture. The gathering of players from different clubs across Europe, different accents of Croatian, different habits from different club environments. Coming together and finding the shape of the team again. Playing for Croatia always meant something particular. There was a sense of continuity with the players who had come before, with the team of 1998 that had gone so far in the World Cup, with the tradition of Croatian football that stretched back through the decades. Luka was part of this now, wearing the red and white, playing his part in the continuing story of the national team. There was a rhythm to these years at Tottenham that was, in its way, very steady. The seasons followed each other. The matches came and went. The training continued. Luka's understanding of the game deepened further. He was in his late 20s now, the age when many footballers are at the height of their abilities, when the experience is there and the body is still strong, when the understanding built over years of training and playing is most fully available. He was a settled, experienced professional. He had been through the uncertainty of the academy years. He had been through the loan spells. He had been through the adjustment to English football. And all of it was part of him now. All of it had added something. The sea was a long way from London. You had to travel south and east for several hours. before you reach the English coast. And the English Channel was not the Adriatic. It was colder, greyer. The water had a different colour and a different quality. But it was still the sea, still that same ancient, restless body of water. And somewhere much further away, on the other side of the continent, the Adriatic was still there. The old stone walls of Zeta still standing at the edge of it. The boats still in the harbour. The light still turning gold over the water in the evenings. In the summer of 2012, another change came, a large one. Luka signed for Real Madrid. Real Madrid is one of the most famous football clubs in the world. It is based in the Spanish capital, in a city of wide avenues and old buildings, and a sky that is very blue for much of the year. The club had been founded more than 100 years before. It had won many things over those years. It had had many famous players. The stadium was very large, one of the largest in the world. On match nights, with the lights on and the crowd filling every seat, it was a particular kind of place. Something very old and very grand and very serious about football. And Luka was going there. Madrid was a different city from London. Brighter, drier. The light harder and more direct. The sky above the city was very wide and very blue in summer. The streets were wide too. The buildings along the main avenues were large and ornate. There were old parks with tall trees and fountains. In the evenings, the city came alive in a different way from London. People ate late. The streets were busy until midnight and beyond. The pace of the city was different. More outdoor. More social. The cafes and restaurants and bars that lined the streets of the city centre filled up in the evenings and stayed full for a long time. For Luka, arriving in Madrid from London, this must have been another considerable adjustment. A new city, a new club, a new language, new teammates, a new way of playing. Spanish football had its own character. It was more technical than English football, more focused on possession, more patient. The pace was different. Not slower, exactly, but differently paced. More emphasis on holding the ball, on finding the right moment, on the shape of the team's movement. And in many ways, this suited Luka. His game had always been about intelligence and timing, rather than pace and power. Spanish football asked for exactly those qualities. The training ground at Real Madrid was called Valdebebas. It was a large, modern facility on the outskirts of the city. Many pitches, excellent grass, everything well maintained and well organized. In the mornings, the Madrid sky above the training ground was already bright, the light very clear at that early hour. The pitches very green against the dry, pale landscape around them, and the ball moving across the grass with the particular crispness it has in dry conditions. Clean and fast and precise. His new teammates at Real Madrid were extraordinary players, among the best in the world. Players who had grown up in different countries and spoken different languages and come through different football cultures. And yet, they had all, in their different ways, arrived at the same level. The level of a club like Real Madrid. Finding a place among these players required its own kind of adjustment, its own patience, its own quiet confidence. Luka had been doing this throughout his career, arriving somewhere new, finding his place. He had done it in Zagreb. He had done it in London. And now he did it again in Madrid. The first season was one of learning the patterns of the team, the preferences of the coach, the habits of the players around him. Every team has its own grammar, its own way of speaking the language of football, and you have to learn it.
Not by being told, by training alongside it every day, by playing in it and making mistakes and correcting them and playing again.
This is how footballers learn, through repetition, through time, through just being inside the thing until it begins to feel natural. Luka was patient with this. He had always been patient. Madrid in autumn had a particular quality. The summer heat had eased. The light was still bright, but no longer fierce. The trees in the Retiro Park, the large old park in the middle of the city, went slowly golden. The broad avenues were full of fallen leaves. In the evenings, the air was cool and clear. People walked slowly in those autumn evenings, along the old avenues, through the park. The city moving at a gentle pace in the good, cool weather. Luka would have moved through this city in the early years, learning it, finding its rhythms, the routes from the apartment to the training ground, the quiet streets near where he lived, the places to walk in the evenings when the day was finished. Every city has its own way of becoming familiar, its own particular streets and parks and small details that eventually come to feel like home. Madrid gave itself to him slowly, the way all places do, over time, through repetition, through the ordinary accumulation of days. His family had come with him to Madrid. He had married some years before. His wife's name was Vanya. They had children, and they made a life in Madrid. Not a public life, not a loud one, a quiet family life in the middle of a large, busy city. The children growing, the seasons passing, the ordinary, beautiful things of family. In the years that followed, Luka found his place at Real Madrid. It happened the same way it had always happened. Slowly, through the work, through the training and the matches, and the gradual building of understanding with the players around him. He became an important part of how the team functioned. Not the most visible player, always. Not the one scoring the spectacular goals or making the dramatic runs. But the one in the middle of things, keeping the ball moving, finding the right pass, setting the tempo. The one that the team organized itself around, without always knowing that it was doing so. The stadium on match nights was a remarkable place. The lights above the pitch very bright and very white. The crowd filling the enormous bowl of the stadium. The noise that came from all sides. And the pitch itself, immaculate and green, laid out below all of it. Luka moved through these nights the same way he moved through everything, without being overwhelmed, with his usual steadiness, finding the space, making the pass, moving again. The seasons in Madrid passed. One season of league football, then another. The cup competitions, the European competitions, the matches in other cities and other stadiums, the travel and the hotels. and the different grounds across Europe. And always the return to Madrid, to the wide avenues and the morning light and the training ground at Valdebebas, to the family and the quiet evenings at home. Madrid in summer was very hot. The city emptied out in the deepest summer. People left for the coast, for the north of Spain, for other countries. The streets were quieter, the restaurants less busy. The heat settled over the city in the afternoons like something heavy and still. And then in the evenings, when the sun went down, the air cooled and people came back out. The terraces filled up. The parks were pleasant again. The long summer evenings of Madrid had their own kind of ease. Luka returned to the Croatian coast in the summers, back to the Adriatic. The particular blue of that sea after the dry brightness of Madrid was something. The coolness of the water, the smell of the salt air, the old stone of the Dalmatian towns, the evenings on the waterfront with the light going golden over the sea. These summers were a kind of resetting, a return to something fundamental. The sea and the old towns and the family gathered together away from the season and the stadiums and all of it. Just the summer, just the sea, just the ordinary, unhurried days. And then September would come, and the season would begin again, and Luka would return to Madrid, to the training ground, to the morning light on the pitches, to the ball moving across the grass, always back to the work, always back to the ball. There were European nights at the stadium that stayed in the memory of those who watched them. Matches against the biggest clubs on the continent. Nights when the stadium was at its fullest and the atmosphere at its most charged. Luka played in these matches. He moved through them the same way he moved through every match. With care, with attention, with the quiet, consistent effort that was his way. Not the loudest presence on the pitch, but a reliable one. A steady one. The kind of player that a team needs not just in the best moments, but through all of them. Through the full length of a long season. Through the weeks when it is easy, and the weeks when it is difficult. In the middle years at Real Madrid, something was accumulating. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just steadily, the way things accumulate. The understanding between the players was deepening. The team was becoming very good, one of the best versions of itself, and Luka was a central part of that. He was in his early 30s now, the age when many players begin to slow, when the body requires more care, more rest between matches. Luka had always taken care of himself. He had always been attentive to the things that allowed a footballer to play for a long time. The recovery, the sleep, the food, the details that accumulate into longevity. And his body responded. He remained available, consistent, present, season after season. The city of Madrid had become home by now. Not in the way that Zadar had been home. Not in the way of childhood. But in the way that a place becomes home in adult life. Through the years spent in it. Through the children growing up in its streets. Through the rhythms of daily life that become so familiar, they are simply part of you. the route to the training ground, the park near the house where the children played, the particular quality of the evening light on a certain avenue in autumn. These things had become his. Croatia was still there. Still the national team. Still the red and white. Still the flights back across Europe for the international windows. Still the gathering of the squad, the familiar faces, the shared language and the shared history of the team. Luka continued to play for Croatia. He continued to be part of that. Not just a player now, but one of the older players. One of the ones who had been there for many years. One of the ones the younger players looked toward. The sky over Madrid at night was dark and wide, not as full of stars as the sky over the village of Modric had been, all those years ago. Not as open, but still a sky. Still the same sky that was over Zadar, and over Zagreb, and over London, and over everywhere that Luka had lived. The same stars, even if you had to look more carefully to find them in the light of the city. The sea was far away, but it was always somewhere in the background. The way certain things from childhood are always somewhere in the background. Not always thought of, not always present in any conscious way, but there, part of the foundation. The years at Real Madrid continued. One season, and then another after that. The calendar of football turning over and over. August to May. August to May. The same cycle, year after year. Pre-season in the summer heat. The league beginning in September. The competitions deepening through the autumn and the winter. The final weeks of the season in the warmth of late spring. And then summer again. And then it began once more. Luka moved through these cycles steadily. He trained in the mornings. He played in the matches. He rested when the body needed rest. He was careful with himself in the way that only experience teaches you to be careful. Knowing when to push. Knowing when to hold back. Knowing the difference between tiredness that should be pushed through and tiredness that should be respected. These are things you learn slowly, over many years, over many seasons. And Luka had the years now. He had the seasons. Madrid in the mornings had a particular light, hard and clear and very bright, even early. The sky a deep, clean blue above the rooftops. The city already warm before most people were fully awake. The streets near the training ground quiet at that early hour. Just the sound of a distant car. The sound of birds in the trees along the avenue. And then, the training ground appearing. The pitches green and damp in the morning light. The smell of the grass. The familiar beginning of another ordinary day. He was 32. Then 33. The years were moving more quietly now. Not slowly, exactly. Not dragging. Just moving with a different quality. The way time moves when you are experienced enough to notice it. When you have been doing something for long enough that you understand it will not last forever. Not with sadness. Not with urgency. Just with a kind of quiet attention. And noticing. In the summer of 2018, Luka went to the World Cup in Russia with Croatia. The tournament was held in June and July. When the Russian summer was warm and long, the Croatian team had prepared carefully. They had good players, they had experience, and they began the tournament. We will not follow every match in detail. That is not what this night is for. We will only say that the Croatian team went very far, further than many people had expected. Match after match, through the group stage, and then the knockout rounds. The team moving through the tournament one game at a time, one day at a time. There were long, difficult matches. Matches that went to extra time and then to penalties. Late nights in stadiums. Long waits. The team always finding a way through. Luka played in all of them, through the heat of the Russian summer. Through the long extra times. Still making his passes. Still finding the space. Still keeping things moving. The team reached the final. It was played on a Sunday evening in Moscow. The stadium was full. Croatia played against France. The match was long and at times difficult. And at the end of it, France had won. Croatia had finished second. For the players, that evening must have been very quiet. The long flight home. The tiredness in the body after weeks of competition. The particular kind of stillness that follows something large, when the noise of it is over and only the quiet is left. They had come a very long way. They had done something that Croatian football had not done before. And now it was finished. And the quiet had come. Luka received an award after that World Cup. The award for the best player of the tournament. He held the golden ball in his hands. He was photographed with it. And then the tournament was over. And everyone went home. And the season began again. Later that same year, there was another award. A larger one. The Ballon d'Or. It is given each year to the player judged to have been the best in the world. For many years before 2018, it had been won by the same two players, alternating between them. And then it was given to Luka. He received it at a ceremony in Paris. He stood on a stage in a large hall. He was given the golden ball. He said some words. And then the evening was over. And he returned to Madrid. And the next morning, he went to training. The same training ground. The same pitches. The same grass. Damp in the morning light. The same ball. These things are worth noting calmly. They happened. They were real. But they were not the whole of the life. They were moments in it. Bright moments, perhaps. But still just moments. The life was made of something else as well, of all the ordinary days. The early mornings at the training ground, the quiet evenings at home, the seasons in Madrid, and the summers by the Adriatic, the slow accumulation of all those unremarkable days. That was the larger part of it. The seasons continued after that. Luka went on playing. This is perhaps the most remarkable thing. Not the awards, not the titles, but the continuation. The simple willingness to keep going, to keep training, to keep preparing, to keep showing up, season after season, into his mid-30s, when most players had stopped, when the game had moved on to younger people. Luka was still there, still on the pitch, still making his passes, still finding the space. His body required more attention now, more careful preparation before training, more careful recovery afterward. The margins were smaller than they had once been, but he respected them. He paid attention to what his body needed, and his body continued to respond, continued to be available. The training ground at Valdebebas in the mornings. This image had repeated itself so many times now, so many mornings, so many seasons. The drive through the quiet streets, the car park, the changing rooms, the pitches appearing, green and damp and waiting, and then the session beginning, and the ball moving, always the ball moving. Madrid had changed around him over the years. New buildings had gone up, old ones had been renovated. New restaurants and cafes had opened in streets that Luka had known since he first arrived. The city was always changing in small ways, and yet it remained, in its essential quality, the same city, the same wide avenues, the same blue sky, the same evening light on the old buildings along the Paseo del Prado, the same park with its tall trees and its fountains. His children were growing. They had grown up in Madrid, mostly, in the schools and the parks and the streets of the city. They spoke Spanish with the ease of children who have learned a language simply by living inside it. They were becoming their own people, with their own lives and their own interests and their own ways of moving through the world. And Luka watched this, the way parents watch, with a quiet wonder. Croatia was always there. The national team, the red and white. He kept returning to it, through his 30s, into territory where most players had long since retired from international football. He kept returning, each time a little older, each time carrying a little more weight of experience. The younger players around him getting younger while he stayed the same age in his mind, and yet still there, still making the same passes, still reading the game, still belonging. There is a quality that some athletes develop over a very long career, a kind of distilled simplicity, where everything that is not essential has been removed, where what is left is only the most necessary things. The movement, the touch, the decision. Nothing extra, nothing wasted. Luka had arrived at something like this. After so many years, after so many thousands of hours on so many different pitches in so many different countries, what remained was very simple and very good. The evenings at home in Madrid were quiet. After training, after matches, the family together, the sounds of the house, the children's voices, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening, food being prepared, the television on somewhere, the city outside going about its evening, the particular quality of a Madrid evening in the warm months, when the light lasted and the streets were busy and the sound of the city drifted up. And then later, when the house was quiet and the children were asleep, the real stillness came. The stillness of a house at night, the particular deep quiet of late evening, just the small sounds of the building, the distant sound of the city, reduced and far away, the dark behind the windows. The sea was always somewhere, always in the background of everything, the Adriatic, moving quietly on the other side of the continent. The old stone walls of Zadar still at the edge of it. The harbour, the boats, the evening light on the water. These things did not change. While the career moved through its stages, and the cities changed and the years accumulated, the sea stayed the same. The same blue, the same sound, the same quality of stillness in the early mornings. Luka returned to it each summer. Each year, the return. Walking along the waterfront of Zadar in the evening. The sea beside him, dark and quiet. The old streets behind him, familiar as breathing. The smell of salt and old stone. The particular softness of the air on the Croatian coast in summer. The way the light held on over the water, long after the sun had set. These returns were simple. Nothing remarkable happened in them. He walked. He sat. He ate with family. He swam in the sea. He let the season and the football and all of it fall away for a while. And there was just the sea and the sky and the old town and the unhurried days of summer. A football career is a long time. And it is also not very long at all. It is long in the way that any sustained effort is long. Full of repetition. Full of the same days done over and over. And it is short in the way that all things are short when you look back at them. The years collapsing somehow into each other. The seasons running together, until the whole of it seems from a distance surprisingly brief. Luka was still playing, still at Real Madrid, into his late 30s, still on the pitch, still in the starting 11, still making the same quiet, accurate passes that he had been making since the car park outside the Colovare Hotel in Zadar, since the hard concrete and the fast-moving ball and the development of that soft, attentive touch. All of it still there, distilled and refined and still there. The training ground in the mornings. This image, again. Always this image. The drive through the quiet streets of the city before most people are awake. The car park. The changing rooms. The pitches. Green and damp. Waiting. The ball placed at the centre of the pitch. And then the session beginning. And the players moving. And the ball moving with them. The same sounds as always. The sound of boots on grass. The sound of the ball being struck. The sound of voices. The morning birds in the trees at the edge of the training ground. These are the sounds that have accompanied his whole career. From the very beginning. From the small pitches in Zadar and the car park with its hard ground. Through the academy in Zagreb and the loan clubs and the seasons in Croatia. Through London and the grey English mornings and the wet grass. Through the bright Madrid mornings and the long Spanish seasons. Always these same sounds. The ball, the grass, the voices, the birds. And somewhere, underneath all of it, somewhere in the very deep background, the sea. We are near the end of the story now. Not the end of the life, not the end of the career, just the end of this quiet telling of it, this gentle moving through the years. The village of Modrici is still there, small and quiet among the hills. The stone houses, the fields at the edge of the village, the wide sky. It has not changed very much. The hills are the same hills. The sky is the same sky. The wind moves through the same trees at the edge of the same fields, and Zadar is still there. The old stone walls at the edge of the sea, the narrow streets, the small squares, the harbour where the boats rock gently in the water, the sea right there, always right there, changing colour through the hours of the day, pale in the early morning, brilliant blue at midday, deepening in the afternoon, going dark and quiet in the evening, always moving, always making its soft, steady sound. And somewhere, in all of this, in the village and the sea and the city and the training grounds and the stadiums and the long seasons and the ordinary evenings, somewhere in all of it, a boy who once kicked a ball along the paths between the stone houses, who followed it as it rolled, who did that simple thing over and over and over for his whole life. The night is very quiet now. Whatever sounds were there before have softened, or perhaps you are no longer hearing them. Perhaps they have become part of the background, part of the texture of the night. The sea is moving somewhere, far away, in and out, very slowly, against old stone. The sky above the Dalmatian coast is dark and full of stars tonight, the kind of dark that only exists far from the cities, deep and soft and very still, the stars very clear, the way they were above the village all those years ago, the way they have always been. The training ground is empty now, the pitch is dark, the ball resting somewhere, still, quiet. The trams in Zagreb have stopped for the night. The city is sleeping. The cathedral on the hill above the old town is dark. The market square is empty. The avenues are still. Madrid is sleeping too. The wide streets empty in the small hours. The park very quiet. The fountains still running softly in the dark. The sound of the water, very gentle, very far away. The sea is still moving. It has always been moving. It will always be moving. In and out. In the dark. Against the old stones. That slow and steady sound. You can let the story rest here. There is no ending, really. Just the gradual quieting. The way the light fades at the end of a long day. The way a city settles into its night. The way the sea keeps moving long after everything else has gone still. The story drifts now, like something on the surface of the water, moving very slowly, without direction, without hurry. The village, the stone houses, the wide sky, The sea, the old walls, the evening light on the water, the ball rolling slowly across the grass, and then resting, resting. Still, the night around you is soft. The dark behind your eyes is soft. The sounds are very far away now, very quiet. The sea moves, in and out, in and out. Somewhere the sky is beginning to lighten. Not here, not yet, but somewhere, at the far edge of the night, the first very faint change is beginning. The deep dark becoming, very slowly, slightly less dark, the way it always does, the way it has always done. But here it is still night, still quiet, still the soft dark, still the sea somewhere, moving gently, still the stars above the coast, and you are here, still, drifting. The story is resting now. It has found a quiet place, and it is resting, the way everything rests eventually, the way the city rests, the way the fields rest, the way even the sea, between one wave and the next, holds a moment of stillness. Just the stillness now. Just the dark, just the soft and steady nothing of the deep night. Rest here,